Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. On today's show, the Home Secretary has written a letter to all 43 police forces in England and Wales, urging them to ramp up the use of stop and search to prevent violence and save more lives, despite claims that its use unfairly targets racial and ethnic minorities. Global leadership speaker Onye Anyadu will soon be joining me in the studio for his take on the polarising subject. And volatility in the mortgage market due to high interest rates means people looking to remortgage their homes will pay an average of £2,900 a year or more from 2024. Too much, say opposition parties who are urging the government to step in and support beleaguered homeowners. I'll be getting some expert analysis from Kai Neufeld, the head of forecasting and thought leadership at the Centre for Economics and Business Research. He'll be shortly joining me in the studio. Then later, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. But first, David Cameron has admitted failures in his government's preparations for a pandemic, but defended the austerity drive that he and his Chancellor George Osborne imposed on the country at the time. The former Prime Minister became the first politician to give evidence to the UK-wide public inquiry into COVID-19. The probe seeks to find out what happened during the coronavirus pandemic and what lessons can be learned. No one will be found guilty or innocent, and public hearings will be held until 2026.
Well, I think it was a mistake not to look at, repeating myself slightly, not to look more at the range of different types of pandemic. My reaction to reading Hein was, like many of the other reports, it doesn't mention the potential for asymptomatic transmission. And so, when you think what would be different if more time had been spent on a high infectious asymptomatic pandemic, different recommendations would have been made about what was necessary to prepare for. That's what I think is my focus.
On Monday night, Boris Johnson was sanctioned for lying to Parliament over Partygate, despite having quit the Commons before the vote took place. MPs voted 354-7 to endorse the report by the Privileges Committee after more than 5 hours of debate.
It is not easy to sit in judgment on friends and colleagues. One day you're judging the behaviour, the next day you might be standing next to them in the queue in the members' tea room. I know it is not easy because as Prime Minister, I had to take decisions based on judgments about the behaviour of friends and colleagues, decisions which affected their lives and potentially their careers. But friendship, working together, should not get in the way of doing what is right.
Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, are we, after this week, finally going to put Partygate to rest? The vote's been counted. We know that the Palace of Westminster agree with the Privileges Committee findings. We will be reading more from Boris Johnson every week in the Daily Mail. But is this it now?
Well, I imagine it will be, unless there's more things that the Mirror, the newspaper that seems to be getting a lot of scoops, comes out with. They've had the video, obviously, that we had this still photo from several months ago, and maybe there's more sort of in the tank, but if there's public appetite for it, I guess the newspapers will keep digging around. I'm sure there is a lot more evidence of stuff like this that happened during lockdown with the Conservative Party. But I think for now that's probably going to be it. And also this vote that we saw, which was pretty conclusive against Boris, as we were expecting. 354 people voted to support the vote, which was basically about this committee's reports that said that Boris Johnson had misled Parliament. 118 Tories voted in favour of that, so that's of his own party. 255 MPs abstained, so didn't turn up, because that includes our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
Say?
Well, abstaining, I guess, it shows that he does have some support. He asked for his supporters, Boris Johnson asked for his supporters not to attend because he said the vote was such a sham, such a shambles. He, referred to it as a, what was the phrase he used?
There's so many, a mockery.
Yeah, so he said don't turn up, but then you had our former Prime Minister Theresa May, who gave a speech and voted in favour of this, Penny Mordaunt, and there are quite a few other sort of senior Conservatives who are sort of putting the boot in. So I think this will be exactly, and it is very important for a lot of people to hear people condemning the Prime Minister for misleading Parliament about his own party and himself breaking the rules that they set at a time of sort of real national difficulty when a lot of people were stoically staying at home and not going to people's funerals, etc. The Liberal Democrats have accused Mr Sunak of a cowardly cop-out for not going along. He said he had a prior engagement. A Labour Party spokesman saying Mr Sunak was too weak to lead a party, too divided to govern, and so this is kind of, the infighting within the Conservatives continue. The vote means Mr Johnson loses his right to a parliamentary pass, so I think in terms of him coming back to government, we're not going to see that anytime soon.
There were some rumours. Press pass.
Well, exactly. He'll be able to get in with his Daily Mail sort of
or a plus
weekly. Yeah, so we'll definitely be talking about Boris Johnson in the future. Yeah. How can you not? He's blockbuster, page turner, and he's got a weekly column in the Mail. So we won't be it won't be the last time we see him. But in terms of government, it's hard to see him getting back in at the moment. But Rishi Sunak has, as we always say this week, that he always has a really difficult job of trying to keep this party together that seems so divided. You see 225 people, Conservative MPs, pretty much not turn up for this vote, and that's kind of in support of Boris Johnson, or to a part of it. You had some people who were supporting him or just didn't want to be one of those people that Boris Johnson could in the future look up and say, oh, you didn't support me, and look at me, I'm back. So, the comparison between Trump and Boris is always there, and they never seem to go away. They're always backing themselves to come back. So who knows? But at the moment, I think Boris Johnson's done for in government for the time being.
How's Rishi come out of all of this? He seemed to avoid any media questions pretty well this week. Of course, as well, there's other news. David Cameron was speaking, first politician to speak at the public inquiry into COVID-19. Has he come away scot-free?
Well, he's got a lot of multitasking to do, as he always has done, and as anyone leading the Conservatives at the moment would have to do, because there are so many different factions. He did say, when he stood outside 10 Downing Street, that he was going to have a new type of politics that was going to be transparent, that was going to be
sober.
Yeah, exactly, fair, and people are pointing to him not going to this vote, to this committee that was set up by Boris Johnson and has found him guilty, and him to not even turn up and vote in it on a Monday when he wouldn't really have had any prior engagements, let's be honest, as kind of double standards. He says he's going to have a new type of politics, and this is exactly the kind of time, but don't forget, he's already got an enemy in Boris Johnson. He doesn't want to poke the beast anymore. And Boris Johnson did make Rishi Sunak what he is now, came from nowhere to Chancellor. So it's a hard thing for Rishi Sunak. I think he couldn't have really done anything else. But yeah, he's got so many different factions to try and control. And at the moment, it seems to be going okay. But then he's got, 4 or 5 by-elections that have come up from various reasons. So he's firefighting. And it's going to be really, really hard to see how he can sort of keep on top of it all the time, especially with the general election coming up, and the Conservatives are not popular, as we know. I think there is stability within the Conservative Party to a point that we haven't had in a while, but how long that can continue and whether he can steer them through a general election, it doesn't look likely they're going to win any general election soon.
Absolutely. We've got a cost of living crisis as well. Thanks, Simon. British homeowners are facing big increases in their monthly payments after lenders hiked rates over the past fortnight. The significant increase means people looking to remortgage their homes will pay an average £2,900 a year or more from 2024. The Resolution Foundation think tank predicts the average 2-year fixed rate deal will hit 6.25% later this year, leaving the UK in a mortgage crunch. Around 800,000 people are expected to remortgage next year. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by Kai Neufeld, the Head of Forecasting and Thought Leadership at the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Kai Neufeld, it's a pleasure having you back in the Channel's Business Global studio. If you're not an economist, it's quite difficult to understand why the mortgage sector has been rattled. But what's been dominating headlines in the UK this week is that the cost of a 2-year fixed rate mortgage has climbed above 6%. What does that mean, and how did we get here?
So the cost of a mortgage, the mortgage rates are basically linked to the bank interest rates of the central bank. So what we're seeing is basically repercussions of the inflationary period that we've seen since the end of the COVID pandemic, really, but of course also because of the war in Ukraine and the increase in energy prices. So banks and lenders price their mortgages in expectation of where interest rates will be in the future. And there has been a marked shift in the past 4 weeks. So because inflation is coming down more slowly than expected, and the labor market is still very tight, and domestic inflationary pressures are still quite high, markets have readjusted their expectations, and that has led to this very sharp increase in mortgage rates over the past 4 weeks, really.
Absolutely. A lot of people are, blaming Liz Truss. I think she was hoping that her 6-week tenure would be gone in 6 weeks. But no, her name keeps on propping up. We know things were bad then because of all these unfunded tax cuts that rattled markets. But then Jeremy Hunt appeared to ease market tensions. But recently, lots of observers are saying that this is the worst mortgage squeeze we've had in about 15 years. And they predict that there's more misery ahead.
Yeah, so with Liz Truss, it was really an expectation that this was a one-off, a miscalculation by the government at the time, and the hope was that we'd never see those rates again, and now we are here just a few months later, and we're back to those levels. So that is really, really unsettling. And it is, as I said, it has to do with the fact that the Bank of England really miscalculated, that they thought inflation would come down very quickly now that energy prices are falling, but they've very much underestimated the level of inflationary pressures that we see in the services sector, that we see in wages, and this means that interest rates will need to stay higher for longer, and this is really putting the squeeze on consumers, on mortgage holders, and we've calculated that the average UK household will pay around almost £4,000 annually more in mortgage interest rates. In London, it's way more than £7,000 per year due to the higher interest rates.
Goodness me, it's a lot of money. I was just saying to you off air, Kai, as well, that a lot of people, they're already defaulting. They are struggling, which is why there have been growing calls, particularly at the start of this week, for the Chancellor, for the Prime Minister, to do something to help with those who are already struggling to pay their bills. Are we likely to see this, or do you think there is a fear and a risk that this could, hike domestically led inflation?
So I think what the government can do and what they should do is probably work quite closely together with lenders and to see what they can do to those who are struggling the most, who are really at risk of losing their home, get those people to extend their mortgage terms, get them on interest-only mortgages to reduce their monthly payments. I think what the government should really not do is get the checkbook out and just distribute money to every mortgage holder in the country, because that, as you said, has the risk of just stoking inflation further, which means higher interest rates for longer, and that is ultimately self-defeating. And frankly, the other side of that is we don't have the money for that. Public finances are quite stretched also because we now have to pay more interest on the public debt that we have.
You're absolutely right, Kai. If we can we just zoom out a little bit and focus on the central bank? Because Andrew Bailey, the governor, is under a lot of pressure at the moment. There are some suggestions that perhaps he should go. Some are even saying that we were too slow to hike interest rates, and now we're catching up with other comparable economies. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I've had actually a lot of sympathy with Andrew Bailey for a lot of time, because and I think inflation has many reasons, and we've had the post-pandemic recovery, we've had the kind of unforeseeable energy price shock due to the war in Ukraine, but I think now comes a point where you have to ask the question, after we've been dealing with inflation for 18 months or longer, and the bank is still making these forecasting errors and making these misjudgments really about the level of domestically generated inflation and how quickly it will come down. I think this was more foreseeable, and I think it reflects badly upon the bank, frankly. Yeah.
No, it does. What are your forecasts for the economy for the rest of the year? We had April GDP figures, a slight hike after a dip in March. Q1, some growth, but we're still very much limping our way out of a recovery, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think for the time being, it looks like more of the same, to be frank. So we have very, very slight growth, and I think we probably could still get away without a recession unless this squeeze gets even stronger, because all of that money that is, of course, going on interest payments on mortgages is not money that is available for consumption, for other spending in the economy. So there is a downside risk to that. But we have a forecast of, very slight but minimal growth, and inflation continuing to fall until the end of the year, below 5% by the end of the year. But there is that risk and that real difficulty in getting it from that level, 4 to 5%, down to 2%, because now expectations have shifted upwards and inflation is entrenched in the economy.
Kai Neufeld, Head of Forecasting and Thought Leadership at the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, global leadership speaker Onye Anyado will soon be joining me in the studio for his take on the Home Secretary's call for the police to ramp up stop and search measures in London, even though it disproportionately targets young black males. And I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be speaking with global leadership speaker Onye Anyado. But until then, here's a breakdown of the biggest business news stories of the week. Alibaba Group has announced its CEO and chairman, Daniel Zhang, will step down from the roles to focus on its cloud division as the Chinese e-commerce giant moves ahead with a plan to split into 6 business units. The CEO role will be handed over to Eddie Wu, chairman of Alibaba's e-commerce platform Taobao and Tmall Group, while Executive Vice Chairman Joseph Tai will take over Zhang as chairman with effect from the 10th of September. The succession comes just a few months after the tech giant announced its biggest restructuring in its 24-year history. South African business tycoon Johan Rupert has toppled Aliko Dangote to snatch the crown as Africa's richest person. According to Forbes, the chairman of a Swiss luxury goods firm has an astonishing net worth of $12 billion, ahead of Dangote, who is thought to have an estimated $10.8 billion in his treasure chest. Economists suggest Dangote, along with the BUA cement founder Abdul Samad Rabiu, suffered a significant blow to their fortunes following the operational charges inflicted by the Central Bank of Nigeria on the foreign exchange market. Supermarket inflation in Britain has eased to its lowest level this year, but remains high, forcing people to change how they eat and cook as household budgets are strained. According to the data firm Kantar, grocery inflation declined to 16.5% in the 4 weeks to June the 11th, down from 17.2% last month and a record 17.5% in March. It remains at its 6th highest level since the financial crisis since 2008. Now to our final story. Suella Braverman has called on police to increase the use of stop and search powers to prevent violence and save more lives. In a statement aimed at all 43 forces in England and Wales, the Home Secretary said officers who used the powers had her full support. Her comments are likely to alarm critics of stop and search, who point out that the technique disproportionately targets black and minority ethnic communities. I discussed this reaction with global leadership speaker Onye Anyado. Onye Anyado, it's a pleasure having you in the Channel's Business Global studios for the first time ever.
Yes.
Earlier this week, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, sent, I believe, a letter to all police forces across England and Wales, basically saying that they should ramp up their stop and search as we go through a wave of crime across the country. I don't know what it is about stop and search and the black community, but it does send a shiver down our spines.
Yeah.
Do you believe personally that this method of stopping crime unfairly targets ethnic minorities?
Yeah, it does. It really does. I mean, even the terminology "ramp up," that's an aggressive, very forward-thinking, not so much forward, but aggressive wording. So I think here in central London or in London, of course, it's gonna be ethnic minorities, and even the police force have said that we are institutionalized racist.
Yeah.
You know, unfortunately, and that's the truth of the matter. She mentioned that it's going to be across England and Wales. So Cardiff, there's going to be parts of Cardiff. There's going to be no black young boys. That's going to be searched. There's going to be parts of maybe Humberside, Devon, Portsmouth. There's only going to be white young boys. But in central London, if they're going to ramp it up 100%, they most probably target 4 young black boys walking by themselves, where they potentially look like gang members. Let's stop and search them.
I can't go through all the statistics,
Yes.
but I know some people will be screaming down the TV at me, saying that, well, we know that black boys, on a whole, if you look at it as a countrywide, we are less likely to get involved in crime because we are such a small proportion of this country anyway.
Yeah.
And we know that even with drugs, because I know with stop and search, it's not just knives they're looking for, they're looking for anything. You're more likely to find drugs on a white male than you are on a black person. But then, of course, London is not Britain. So let's focus on London a little bit. And we know that knife crime disproportionately does affect our community, particularly the Nigerian community, because there are just so many Nigerians living in London. If the police are not stopping and searching these young youths, what do you think is a better deterrent from getting involved in crime?
I think is a multifaceted situation. One, you know, are they going to increase the sentencing? Is that going to be a deterrent? Because I've been in prison myself. I've done work in prisons, and some young people, they don't actually care. They really don't actually care. So you have to look at that side of it, of young people. They don't actually care. So you
they don't care if they're being stopped, or they don't care if they go to prison or anything.
They don't care about anything. That's the reality. So even if they get stopped and served, and they are a gang member and they haven't got anything on them, it's a win for them, isn't it? And it's a statistic for the government and the police. So I think for me, it's very multifaceted. Two, you know, as I said, I've done work in prisons, and there's a lot of trauma coming from young people. Some of them are really scared. Some of them are really oblivious to what's going on. They don't understand the reality of what it means to carry a knife. Now, again, not every single young person is innocent, but at the same time, it is a situation where the police can't do anything about it, and it's been going on since I was living that particular lifestyle. It's been going on.
You're absolutely right. There's been so much discussion about where Black Brits are placed in society.
Yes.
I think, you know, because of the open door policy that was given to Ukrainian refugees, lots of questions about why this is not being offered to black and brown people.
Of course.
Of course, we had the Windrush scandal. Post-Brexit vote, a lot of us who had lived here all our lives felt disconnected with English and other people amongst the nation. And then there were findings from the Young and Black report, and that revealed that the vast majority of black youth do still feel that they cannot get the job opportunity that they want because of the colour of their skin. Is that still a reality in Britain in 2023, that you can be black and British, born here, raised here, understand the rules of the land, but still face prejudices when you're trying to attain a level of, you know, achievement?
Of course, even organisations admit to that there's this discrimination, racist discrimination in that sense. But it takes that high level of guile, persistence, determination and a discipline. Because you mentioned the fantastic Windrush situation. Many parents or families came over from, you know, the Caribbean, the West Indies. They had to work triple hard in the face of racism that's unprecedented at that time. So for a young person now, but it wasn't bad as your parents when they came over from the West Indies. So I think, unfortunately, we're living in a country that is not every white person is racist, but the UK or Great Britain was developed on racism. Let's not get it twisted. So I think it's going to take an extra hard work. You know, a lot of the Black Lives Matter, you know, diversity is being pushed. That's good, but there's still a lot of work to be done. But I think there's still opportunities out there. Yeah,
talk to me about those opportunities. So how do you get over that mindset? Because I think that's why there can be such a divide between what some people would call the black and blues, which are the Conservatives, the likes of Kemi Badenoch, the likes of Kwasi Kwarteng, you know, MPs that basically say, we're not looking at the colour of our skin, we're just wanting to get our job done. And then you've got, on the other hands, the likes of Kate or Samor, friend of the show, Dawn Butler, on the other side of the spectrum, that are like, no, you cannot not talk about race because that's the elephant in the room. What kind of advice do you give to young blacks who, yes, are potentially being prevented from climbing the career ladder because of the colour of their skin, but knowing they can do it despite the colour of their skin?
Yeah, and I think you just answered the question. They can do it despite the answer of the skin, but it takes a high level of excellence, understanding your industry. I've always told when I work with young people, be a future thinker. The future you're not thinking about has already started. Just don't be stagnant in your thinking. I think sometimes that's a situation. And then we can listen to the negativity, network with like-minded black professionals who are pushing for the next level, but also network with like-minded white individuals too. So you have a network of black, white, Asian, Chinese, whatever, who are pushing for the next level. Because when you get in, as you know, when you get in particular circles, the colour of your skin is not even mentioned in that sense. They want to see the value that you bring. And I think sometimes if we think the only value we've got is the colour of our skin and people don't value our colour of our skin, let's flip it round. Let's bring value, let's bring new thought leadership, let's bring a new ideology into the workplace or into that industry. And we know that because of disruption, let's be a disruptor too.
Touched on some really important points. And as I said, we know Nigerians are doing amazing here, but we can't forget the fact that a lot of young Nigerian boys are really caught up in a lot of really bad things, and they do need the mentoring, they do need the thought leadership, and this is a topic I think we owe a duty to the community, come in unity, to talk about again. So we certainly will be welcoming you back. Onye Anyado, a global leadership speaker. Thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.